quickly looking at the role of the trustee board. That's we'll skip past that. Just run through it. Okay. So the board, trustee boards are people who are trusted to do the right thing for an organisation. Effectively, they make sure that the organisation functions effectively, legally, financially, and strategically. The responsibilities are those things. What's interesting about that point is that this is a collective responsibility. Unlike other areas of student union decision making, student boards are all about making decisions together, working in partnership with the other people in the room. And for that reason, if boards are regularly voting on issues, or if there's regular divide in the room in terms of opinion, you tend to normally a telltale sign of a problem with a board or compromised governance. So as a result, it's important that boards seek to find compromise and mutual ground wherever possible in decision making. So that collective responsibility is crucial. We're going to come back to touch on how you kind of instill that type of behaviour a bit later on. So, strategic responsibility. In 2010, when lots of students' unions were required to start to register as charities, we undertook a piece of work called US Good Governance Programme, which produced the Good Governance website, which I'll share with you again later. But interesting in that work is that we were able to break down the key areas of responsibility for trustees in students' unions into 8 areas of activity, and those were responsibility for union democracy. That's delegated from your institution. The trustee of any students' union has responsibility for overseeing and ensuring that the union is run in a democratic fashion, and we're going to come back to when we talk about its relationship with democratic decision making in a short while. Strategic direction, setting the longer term vision of the organisation, and that's obviously linked to organisational performance, so operationalising that strategic plan and monitoring it on an annual basis. Financial performance, making sure that the organisation is solvent and will be for years to come. Legal compliance is self-explanatory. Risk management is an interesting one, and one which I think we're starting to develop and get better at in the base, but one tight of the board and making decisions based upon that. Crucial role is however always stop and communication with the democratic decision-making body in a union. And the staff team that undertake kind of the operational duties of the organisation, make stuff happen, if you like. You then have decision-making sphere, which is your union council, your referenda, that students will participate in the decision-making. Obviously, that is a democratic sphere. And then you have these board who are collectively responsible, as we've talked about, for the things. Keep losing the sound. Okay, I'm feedback on the sound quality. If it's trying, I'll ask technician to come back in and have a look at it. just outlining the three different spheres of decision making that exist in a students' union. And what's crucial, I suppose, is that they're conscious of those interrelationships, that they are managing in a standard charity where you didn't have democratic decision making, you just have the board and the operations, but the board is conscious of that democratic sphere, and remember that one of its 8 areas of responsibility is to ensure that the union is democratically run. There are times where that decision can come into conflict, where the decision bodies will make a decision which perhaps compromise longer term plans or calls into question some of the strategic or financial or oversight that the board has. And it's at that point that the boards have to make value judgments based on the nature of the scenario. We'll discuss a little bit more why that is important when it comes to recruiting external trustees. Okay, can you hear me a bit better now? Here, okay. I'll carry on. At the moment, NUS's membership intelligence survey demonstrated that student union trustee boards are made up roughly of a combination of officer trustees, elected sabbatical officers in some cases part-time officers there as well, but 45% of student union boards are made up of those. 25% students, 30% external trustees. Students are typically either appointed or elected, and we're going to come back to that. External trustees appointed to a number of areas. None of this will be news to you, I should imagine. There are a few responses who also say they have university-appointed trustees or others, and I think that the university-appointed trustee introduces an interesting dynamic. There were a significant number of people. It does seem to be recording okay. It just seems to be something wrong with the link. So I'm going to, right. It seems to be recording okay. So I'm going to try and carry on, and hopefully the mic. I don't think it's a problem with the microphone or the connection. I think it's a problem with the way that it's transmitting. So if this keeps dipping out, then hopefully the recording will be accurate. You can access the webinar that way. Potential conflict of interest that occurs with having a university stakeholder on the board. Now, there are cases where this is necessary, and the institution where the institutional relationship will be such that this is less of an issue. However, important, I think the crucial thing when you're talking about university or institutional trustees is that when they sit on the board, they sit there as an equal trustee. Someone who makes decisions in the interest of the charity rather than in the interests of the institution. It's interesting, Chris is highlighting here that you have 2 university trustees. I've listed offline to talk about how you mitigate and manage that. I think the crucial thing is that where you do have university appointed trustees, that that they go through the same kind of skills and skills audit and kind of values match check that you would put any external trustee through, where you are required to do that. The final point on this slide is that obviously the clear that all amount of responsibility in terms of managing the charity. Okay, that should be massive shocks to you, and that's the broad composition of the board. So what does this look like, and then is it effective? All of these points come from a piece of a little bit of research we did last year, where we wanted to take stock of where student union and trustee boards have got to and how they've evolved. And before we were able to make any assertions about the board composition, we wanted to do was we wanted to consider those fundamental principles as to why these positions exist. The trustees. I mean, it seems obvious that they are on the board, but what's the rationale behind it? So, as elected representatives, they're in the business of consulting with students on a day-to-day basis. Their responsibility is to understand the beneficiaries' needs and to represent these at a board level. As a democratic organisation, as I say, it really follows that in the most senior decision making, there should be some democratic input to the board. And finally, that I find interesting is that what has emerged over kind of the 4 or 5 years that this has been developed, that officers straddle all 3 spaces. So they're on the trustee board, yes, but they also lead the democracy. But they're also embedded within the operations of the organisation, allows them an insight into an influence over all 3 spheres, and something unique to many trustee boards. But in a membership organisation, and one which represents the body, I think that is important, that you have a group that are able to cut across all 3 of those areas: the day-to-day operations, the democratic decision-making body, and the trustee board, and critical then to make sure that all those 3 are pulling in the same direction, or at least pulling in the same direction wherever possible. So, constituent, what have we got? Here, I think, is diversity. And as we undertook a piece of research and we spoke to student union trustees and we spoke to chief executives, we interested in what rationale for student trustees on the board. You've got officer trustees who are representatives of students. Do we feel the need? I mean, other than balancing the number of externals to officers, other than that, what's the rationale for having student trustees on the board? And one of the sounding things that came back from our research was diversity. Diversity both of background, but also diversity of opinion. And obviously those 2 things are linked, but diversity of opinion being crucial in that it's not just about the modes of study that you have, the way in which you engage. Are you part-time? Are you full-time? Are you postgraduate? Are you undergraduate? Considerations were felt that if more diversity of students on contributing to decision making in the board, you're more likely to get better decisions. A great body of research says a more diverse board tends to make better decisions, and even the corporate sector are tending to move along to this point of view now. Charity. The students are in a unique position to be able to articulate kind of beyond the charities the benefit of the charity and what the trustee board is there to do. It's kind of a real-time check on the external trustees and the sabbatical officers that they are making for beneficiaries is in their interest. Students unions students don't hold a mixture of professional skills, and I think that was something which we found comparing boards of today with boards of say or the management committees of 7 or 10 years ago, was that what we found is that you are unlikely, obviously, to get a mixture of knowledge, skills, and experience through an election selection process than you are if you are to do it through a process of recruitment. Lay trustees have brought those skills to the boards of students' unions, and they brought them for testing. Obviously, there's still a need for trustee boards to collectively go out and consult with experts where they don't have the skills in-house. But undertaking skills audit and making sure that you have some broad bases covered in terms of skills like HMS, some run organisations before, strategic experience, really helped to roster boards on consultancy, but also to mean they're invested in the decision making and commit to the organisation. What interviews that, I mean, one of the things that isn't that shocking is that given the massive turnover that students' unions have, something which is unique for student union trustee boards, trustees really provide a source of continuity, which is seen as hugely valuable, particularly for a historical context on decision making. Finally, I think the point that they are neither officers or students, they're not involved in the democratic decision making. In the organisation, one which is typical in the third sector of high-performing boards that you would expect to see. Trustees are not involved in the day-to-day operations. And whilst I've said that that's a healthy thing in terms of being a representative body and being a democratic body that the officers are, it is crucial, I think, that lay trustees have that distance to be able to make judgments. So that kind of slides for what do we want to say about why people are there. And it's interesting that we hadn't really, whilst we kind of assumed that was the way that all student unions were before, we'd never taken the time to kind of define that. And that sort of gives us a baseline for being able to say, well, on these assumptions, basically these kind of assumptions and conclusions that we're able to draw about why each group were there. What are the best approaches to recruiting those individuals to the board? A lot of the people who are involved in this work said that if it accept the rationale for an officer trustees on the board, that they are a representative, that they're there to ensure democratic input, and that because they have got that kind of universal cross-campus that has ensured they are representatives, then it doesn't really follow that you would have a small group of the trustees, the sabbaticals on the board as trustees. In our interviews, that having a smaller group of the sabbaticals, either elected or who volunteer themselves, or it's written into the bylaws that those positions are trustees and others are not, within the team, can lead to a sense of there being two-tier sabbatical systems. Certain people have greater authority than others, particularly and that was we found through the research that was seen as problematic as it divides in teams. We didn't ascertain any rationale for not putting the sabbatical team on the board, aside from some people saying that would lead to an oversized board or an unwieldy decision making. Although we actually haven't seen evidence of that through our research. So, there just at the bottom, as mentioned, is the 1994 Education Act, which is major union office holder, someone who's cross-campus elected, and obviously there are some officers who won't be cross-campus elected but held sabbatical officer positions. This is something NUS is currently consulting on and seeking legal advice on. So I think that's very much still a question that's up in the air. What do we mean when we use the term major union office holder? And I think we need to be, as we've been clear on the definitions of why other people are at the board, that's something we need to be on in terms of the trustee responsibility. We don't have an answer for that yet, so, but do watch this space. This one is where it gets a bit interesting. So I think been recruited in two ways, either via election, or cross-campus ballot, or some form of selection process or interview an interview process. Rationales that we said about why student fees were there, most namely to add diversity of both background and opinion, with through the process of election. We know that certain groups are less likely to stand for election on campus. What it was important to consider is if you consider diversity to be an important part of the trustee board decision making process, then it must follow that you consider whether election process of electing a student trustees is the right and most fruitful way of doing that to ensure a diverse range of people. Responded to our research said that they really were keen on getting unengaged students involved in the student trustee position, so that we have a sense of not who the union is already serving in terms of its beneficiaries, but more importantly those who are not. So difficult to reach out to get unengaged students to stand for a position of election and go through that process when that's the type of thing that often puts those individuals on, know from election statistics. How do you? Well, I think there's lots of ways and lots of places are doing different things. You certainly can put a concerted effort into election processes and advertising certain societies or certain groups on campus of the types of people that are less likely to stand in election in the first place. That is one of the ways. Other ways to do it, considering an appointment process for students rather than election. I think that there are certain groups of people who are less likely to stand for election, and then perhaps targeting again applications. What is interesting, as soon as somebody wants to submit an application, they probably are engaged, or if they do want to put an application forward, they probably are engaged by that point. It might even be worth exploring. We came to the conclusion the idea of groups that are underrepresented at board level or other areas in your union, and then electing students from those cohorts and inviting them to apply rather than wait for them to put themselves forward. I don't think it's being tested anywhere, but it has. Obviously, there is precedent for citizen jury style decision making in a democratic forum. Now, obviously, it's slightly different in that will have to make a 2-year commitment in some cases to being trustees, and obviously would have to then want to take a position rather than just coming to a one meeting. But some interesting stuff about how we approach both thinking about where there are elections, how we're targeting, and equally think about when it's an appointment process, how you're getting people who would otherwise apply to apply, and potentially identifying groups and identifying or randomly inviting people from those groups to apply. It does some things that would work. And the recruitment of lay trustees. What can we do this based on conclusion for skills, knowledge, and on a continuity to the board? Well, I think that some of them are obvious. It's important to understand. I think what we can do in terms of this is that lots and lots of students' unions are approaching recruiters to support with additional further, simply putting an advert online, but research function in trustees. That is completely when you're recruiting senior staff for students' unions, but for some reason there's still some when you're recruiting trustees, it's something which we don't necessarily look to do professional search capacity. Obviously, there's a cost associated with that. But the benefit is that you get a wider search and wider pool of candidates. In well, I think that offers you the opportunity to skills test your before you get to the interview room. So by the time you get people to the interview room, you already know, or you're pretty confident at least, they have the professional skills, knowledge, and experience that you need for your board. That process to understand their motivations for becoming a trustee, get a sense of their values throughout the course of that process, see whether or not they're a fit for your organisation. Crucial, I think, the role of the CEO or union manager in the recruitment process. In the organisation, it's important that the chief executive has a right to recruitment. Although it became clear, and indeed it is the case across the third sector, that there's only a relationship there between external trustees or the trustees in general and the chief executive. And whilst you have a role in picking and shortlisting candidates, I think it's important that the CEO not have the final say on that decision-making process on the basis that they will potentially by those individuals or to account by the board collectively. Other trustees must be involved in that process, obviously. Able to draw from our research was that there was a driver in the idea that students are bedded in their institution, but they're also bedded in the community, and it also and when trying to influence the people around you, it helps to have someone respected and has gravitas from the local community. And lots of boards indeed are reserving positions for community trustees. So the recruitment process for those are some of the conclusions we can draw about the roles themselves. Why do we fundamentally have those people on the board, and then how can we go about getting them there? What are the best methods of recruitment? And there's no clear-cut answer. Some of those things, is it appointment, is it election for your student trustees? Those need to be decided depending on what fits for your union. But think about the core definitions of how and why the positions are there in deciding the approach to recruitment. And was to think about drivers of good governance. I'm just going to finish by talking about once you have those positions on the board, what behaviour should we be expecting of those individuals at a board level? So, governance. There's an awful lot of work done on this, but it's possible to break the drivers of good governance down into three key groups: with structures, processes, and meetings. Lots of work is done by students' unions around those areas. We spend a lot of time, I think, focusing on our structures of our board right. Is the composition that I've just talked about the right one for us? Are the processes right? Are we producing the right papers and things? Are we producing the right doing them in a timely way? Do we have delegated schemes of authority, a cycle of business for the union? That type of thing is process driven. We have a lot of time and effort trying to make the meetings as productive as we possibly can. So three key groups. But I spend a lot of time focusing on those. The fourth as well, which is behaviours. And I think if we're going to spend the time and effort getting the structures, processes and meetings right, but also spend time once we get those board rooms, we expect them to exhibit in the board, at board level. While structures, processes and meetings are prerequisites for good behaviour, those are in place. The behaviours that are right and appropriate for the meeting can actually exponentially increase the impact of your board. This is a graph that was this conclusion was drawn by Compass Partnership in partnership with Cass Business School back in 2012, and they did a survey of large charities and commonalities between the drivers of effective governance in the large charities. It was a bit of research. It found the conclusion that behaviours, while insisting upon the need for meetings, processes and structures actually deliver the greatest payoff for any organisation. So behavioural drivers, and how do we make those happen in trustee boards? Then I'm going to whiz through this bit because I think we've talked a lot and there's a lot of content in this. But so first, coming in at number 5, it was robust challenge. Basically, 2 senior staff, a board that has the confidence and capability to make a robust challenge to staff. Ex-trustees in their capacity play a crucial role in supporting officers to do this. That's got to be a consideration through the recruitment process. In terms of process, you can put in things like obviously a strategic plan, followed by key performance. The crucial bit in here, I think, is the relationship between the chair of the board, who is often a student, a shadow or not mentor type chief executive or senior, and the board to think about how we implement that in a union board, whereby you have really turnover of trustees, and it takes a while to build the confidence of trustees. Production, training, and the role of external lay trustees is absolutely crucial. It's not the converse to that, but it goes really close and is tightly linked with about challenging the management. It's interesting, I think, that quite often we find that trustee boards in students' unions don't see their role as one of but only of scrutiny. And yeah, it's crucial that the board, again, relationship between the chair and an external, that they play a crucial role in supporting managers as well as simply organising them. Regular one-to-one meetings, being somebody who can be at the end of a phone when something goes wrong, and building a two-way communication between those board members and the senior staff of the organisation, absolutely crucial. So fostering a supportive environment for managers is key. Openness, confidence and trust. There's a lot of writing on this slide, but I basically say this is tough for student union boards. It's difficult for us to get to this point. It's challenging because I think the reason behind that is that high turnover will be changed in a year or two at most. So at the point we have openness, confidence, and trust amongst the trustee board. Students' unions, you often get scenarios where, given that students only meet external trustees maybe 5 times, 6 times a year, they barely know who they are. They don't have key relationships with those individuals, and yet all the evidence of boards in the rest of the third sector points to the fact that that is key. That's absolutely crucial. Those relationships are essential, and so how do you foster that? How do you create confidence, experienced trustees is something that we should really be thinking about. Practical solutions to that are with the board of the year, active team building activities, and make that the processes and meeting structures of the board are in place so that trustees have the information to make decisions, and that conversations go on outside of the boardroom as well is really important. So I think we really think about it in terms of student union land. Number the next driver for good behaviour was that maintaining a strategic focus. This graph represents how, again, in the third sector more broadly, charities felt they allocated their board time. So 75% you can see say that they got the now thinking, the fiduciary, are our finances in order? Are we legally compliant? Are we reporting to who we need to report to? funders or external environment do manage our staff effectively? Are there processes in place? That stuff, 75% roughly of boards said they felt pretty confident they did that. 40% said they were pretty confident in the strategic direction, and they thought about the 3 to 5 year thinking. And 50% of boards would say that they were genuinely engaged in the generative, the far thinking, the purpose for our charity. Do we still have an appropriate mission, vision, values for our organisation? What's the landscape going to look like in 10 years' time for what's it like in 20? Now that sort of stuff can sound a little bit airy and a little bit pie in the sky, but boards must spend time and they must make an effort to think about both the strategic and the generative thinking in meetings, and not obsess just about the now. This is tough in students' unions where we have a cycle of officers and students, and the tendency and the kind of natural instinct for us is to think on your cycle of business. I will have some kind of strategic document which talks about the 3 to 5 years. I wonder can say that they genuinely spend time on generative ideas, thinking about, okay, so that's our strategy. What happens after that? Where should we be taking it? I think, with what you want to make sure is that you're getting some tangible stuff out of that, and you're not wasting the board's time. But I want to get key stakeholders to come and present to the board about what landscape looks like in their eyes in the future, to read papers and pieces in advance and table time within the board meeting for discussion, but also actioning around what relates to the organisation, how it relates to the strategy, and what the organisation should do as a result of that. I think that trustees, as we've talked about, have often there is an interesting perspective on their roles as not being the leaders of the charity responsible for strategy and generative thinking. And obviously, it's important they consider the boundaries in students and student opinion and the democratic decision-making bodies in their peers' generation, and that should be a part of this. But it all needs to have a role in this. I think that is absolutely crucial. So yeah, strategic focus, making sure the board has time to think about strategy and generative thinking. And together as that collective team that we talked about right at the start, when it comes to the role and responsibilities of the board, this is the other stuff we talked about. Boards, the result of this, be effective as they work effectively. It's about making decisions together, and all trustees need to understand that. It's particularly, I think, in Students' Union, where you can sometimes have trustees who are elected on different slates with different manifestos. And it's important that trustees are aware of this as a key responsibility of theirs. We can do this, ensure obviously our team building away days and time in relationships outside of the board, but also set clear objectives for the board. Getting the board, that means to set themselves key goals. Excuse me, for the head. I think can be a sense of team and collective responsibility. The 5 key drivers of behaviours in students' unions. We've talked about them in relation to, once you get people on the board, how we want them to act and what are the challenges for different groups of trustees. Before we talk through the different constituencies of the board, how we can actually drill down and define them, even though some of that stuff is fairly basic, what can we then draw from how we should recruit? And I'll offer you an overview of both, as I say, the constituencies of the board, what we can draw from that in terms of recruitment, but then how we help to instill some of the behaviours required in order for effective and good governance and trustee trustee boards and in trustees. As I say, this webinar will be available online afterwards, so if you have missed any of it because of the sound dipping out, I'll make sure that that link is available through NUS Connect. Okay, if there are any questions now, you can send them through. I'm going to stop recording, stop presenting. NUS.org.uk, and I'm happy to take any questions that way.